The air in the community hall hung thick with the stale scent of overbrewed coffee and simmering resentment. Eleanor Vance gripped the worn armrests of her chair, her knuckles white, as Mr. Sterling, the HOA's current and notoriously uncompromising president, tapped his pen against the podium, a sound as irritatingly precise as his perfectly gelled hair. "Ms. Vance," he began, his voice a smooth, low rumble that barely masked an underlying steel, "we've been over this. The fence must come down. It's a clear violation of Article 7, subsection B, of the Community Covenants. All perimeter fencing must adhere to a uniform height of 4 feet and be constructed of approved picket or vinyl material. Your structure," he paused, letting the word hang in the air, dripping with distaste, "is neither." Eleanor met his gaze head-on, her own a tempest of defiance and a quiet, ancient sorrow. "It's not my structure, Mr. Sterling," she retorted, her voice firm, despite the tremor of adrenaline in her chest. "It's the Old Vance Observatory that fence protects, and it has stood there, in its current form, for over a century. Long before your precious Article 7 was even a flicker in some developer's eye." A ripple of murmurs went through the scattered residents, some nodding in agreement, others casting uneasy glances at Sterling. The fence in question wasn't just old, it was an anomaly, standing a formidable 8 feet tall, a stark, dark silhouette against the often azure sky of their meticulously manicured suburban landscape. It was constructed of a peculiar, dark metal, intricately interwoven with what looked like thick, gnarled iron branches. It curved around the entire property of the Old Vance Observatory, an architectural anachronism itself, a squat, cylindrical building with a weathered copper dome, nestled incongruously amidst modern cul-de-sacs and manicured lawns. To the uninitiated, it looked like a decaying relic, an eyesore. But to Eleanor, it was a guardian, a silent sentinel. Her family had owned the property for generations, a legacy passed down with more than just deeds and titles. It came with an unspoken understanding of the observatory's unique purpose and the fence's non-negotiable presence. Her great-grandfather, a brilliant but eccentric astronomer, had designed both. The stories around it were legend in the Vance family, tales woven through whispered warnings and cryptic journal entries that Eleanor had spent her life trying to decipher. "Ms. Vance, while we appreciate the, shall we say, historical eccentricity of your property," Mr. Sterling continued, a patronizing smile playing on his lips, "our covenants apply to all residents. We have received numerous complaints. It's unsightly, it lowers property values, and frankly, it poses a safety hazard. We've had children try to climb it." Eleanor scoffed, a short, sharp sound. "Climb it? That fence is practically impenetrable. And as for property values, perhaps the community should be focusing on the actual historic landmark that fence protects, rather than whether it perfectly matches the beige vinyl siding of your newly constructed homes." Her gaze swept across the room, challenging. "This isn't just an old building. It's a piece of our past, and that fence is integral to its preservation. Always has been." Mr. Sterling leaned forward, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, yet loud enough for all to hear. "Preservation, Miss Vance, or obfuscation? What exactly are you trying to hide behind that monstrosity? We've offered to replace it with a compliant fence, at no cost to you." Why the stubborn refusal? His words were designed to sow doubt, to paint Eleanor as an unreasonable holdout, perhaps even a suspicious character. Eleanor felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. He was probing, pushing, not just at the fence, but at the mystery she guarded so fiercely. She remembered a specific passage from her great-grandfather's journal, scrawled in hurried, frantic handwriting. "The barrier must never fall. Its purpose is not merely to keep out, but to keep in. The delicate balance ... if breached ... The rest was illegible, a frantic scribble that trailed off into nothing. But the weight of those words, that ominous warning, pressed down on her. "There's nothing to hide, Mr. Sterling," Eleanor stated, her voice regaining its steel, only. Something to protect. Something that predates your rules and your perceptions of beauty. That fence isn't just a boundary. It's a vital component of the observatory's very structure. Its removal would destabilize not just the building, but something far more significant. She saw the skepticism in Sterling's eyes, the knowing smirk. He thought she was mad, or simply grasping at straws. He didn't understand the real gravity of her words. A woman in the front row, Mrs. Gable, a recent transplant to the community, raised a tentative hand. Miss Vance, with all due respect, what exactly is far more significant? Is there a specific historical event or discovery this observatory is known for that justifies such a structure? Eleanor paused, glancing at the curious faces, the mixture of annoyance and genuine intrigue. How much could she say without sounding unhinged, without exposing the full, terrifying truth she was only just beginning to piece together herself? The Old Vance Observatory, Eleanor began, her voice gaining a quiet intensity, was built by my great-grandfather, Arthur Vance, not just as a place to gaze at stars, but to study phenomena unseen by the naked eye, phenomena that, even today, defy easy explanation. And that fence, it's connected to it all, intricately. She didn't elaborate, couldn't. She saw Mr. Sterling exchange a look with another board member, a look that said, "She's losing it." But then, out of the corner of her eye, she caught the flicker of genuine curiosity in Mrs. Gable's eyes, and perhaps a hint of unease. Sterling cleared his throat, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Well, Miss Vance, fascinating as your family's mythology may be, the HOA operates on bylaws, not folklore. You have 30 days. Remove the fence, or face legal action and daily fines." Eleanor stood, her chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, the sound echoing in the suddenly silent hall. She didn't flinch. She simply fixed Mr. Sterling, with a look that promised an unyielding battle. "I will not. And if you force this, Mr. Sterling, you'll unleash something far more problematic than an eyesore on this community." Her words hung in the air, a chilling prophecy that only she, and perhaps the long-dead Arthur Vance, truly understood. The meeting dissolved into hushed whispers, each resident left to wonder what exactly was behind Eleanor Vance's desperate stand, and what terrifying secret did that old, strange fence truly guard. The 30-day ultimatum from the HOA hung over Eleanor like a suffocating shroud, each passing hour a reminder of Mr. Sterling's cold threat. The community hall meeting had left her drained but resolute. Now, the battle shifted from public confrontation to a solitary, frantic race against time within the dusty confines of her family home. She spent every waking moment in the small, cluttered study adjacent to the observatory, a room that smelled of aged paper, forgotten dreams, and the faint, metallic tang that seemed to emanate from the observatory itself. Piles of journals, ledgers, and loose scientific diagrams, all meticulously preserved by generations of Vances, lay scattered across her antique desk, each page a potential key to the mystery of the fence. Her great-grandfather, Arthur Vance, had been prolific, his handwriting a sprawling, elegant script that often dissolved into hurried, almost illegible scrawls when he was clearly on the cusp of a breakthrough, or perhaps a breakdown. Eleanor's fingers, stained with ink and dust, traced the faded lines, her mind grappling with concepts that felt more like science fiction than historical fact. One particular journal, bound in brittle leather, became her primary focus. Its early entries detailed Arthur's astronomical observations, his meticulous charting of constellations, and his groundbreaking theories on celestial mechanics. But then, abruptly, the tone shifted. Dates became less frequent, entries more esoteric. He began to speak of anomalies, not in the distant cosmos, but within the very fabric of the local environment. The fluctuations intensify. One entry read, dated October 17, 1923, a localized distortion, emanating from the very ground beneath the hill. It is not gravitational, not magnetic in any conventional sense. It is something else, a resonance. Eleanor frowned, rereading the passage. Resonance. What could resonate from the earth itself? Further pages spoke of energy signatures and unstable frequencies. He had designed the observatory, she realized, not just to look out, but to measure and contain something within. The fence, initially mentioned as a containment field perimeter, later became the primary dampener, then simply the barrier. His descriptions grew increasingly urgent, hinting at experiments that had gone awry, or discoveries that had proven far more volatile than anticipated. The incident of 26, an entry cryptically noted, necessitated the reinforcement. The first barrier proved insufficient. The pull was too strong. It nearly consumed the very light. Eleanor shivered. Consumed the light. What kind of power was her great-grandfather dealing with? Meanwhile, the HOA's campaign escalated. A certified letter arrived, detailing the first round of fines. $500 per day for noncompliance, retroactive to the meeting. The threat of a lien on her property, even foreclosure, was subtly implied. Then came the phone calls, not just from Mr. Sterling, but from other board members, their voices laced with a mix of false concern and thinly veiled impatience. Eleanor, we just want to help you avoid further penalties. It's for the good of the community. Dear, their words were polite daggers, each one twisting the knife of her mounting anxiety. She knew they were watching, waiting for her to break, to give in. But the more she read, the more she understood the terrifying implications of their demands. The fence wasn't just a physical barrier. It was, in Arthur's own words, a harmonic stabilizer, designed to counteract the unstable frequencies emanating from deep beneath the observatory. Its removal wouldn't just be an aesthetic change. It would be a catastrophic destabilization. One evening, deep into her research, a peculiar incident occurred. The old house, usually creaking and groaning with the familiar sounds of age, suddenly fell unnervingly silent. Eleanor, hunched over a particularly dense schematic of the observatory's internal mechanisms, felt a prickle of unease. Then a low hum began, not from the house, but seemingly through the floorboards, vibrating up from the ground. It was a sound she'd never heard before, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to bypass her ears and vibrate directly in her bones. The antique lamp on her desk flickered wildly, then dimmed to a faint glow, casting long, dancing shadows. Outside the window, the street lights down the block blinked erratically, some winking out entirely before sputtering back to life. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer seemed to ripple across the air to just outside the observatory's dome, a distortion of light that made the evening sky appear to waver like heat haze. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at the schematic, then at the window, then back at the journal where Arthur had written of localized distortions and consuming the light. The hum intensified, a low, guttural growl that seemed to even emanate from the very core of the earth. It lasted only a minute, perhaps less, before fading as abruptly as it had begun. The lamp brightened, the street light stabilized, and the air outside returned to normal. Eleanor sat frozen, her breath catching in her throat. This wasn't a power surge. It was a direct, undeniable manifestation of whatever her great-grandfather had been so desperately trying to contain. The fence, she realized with a chilling certainty, was not merely protecting a historic landmark, it was protecting the world from it. The incident, subtle yet profound, solidified her resolve. She was no longer just fighting an HOA, she was fighting to keep a dangerous, unseen force contained. The truth was far more terrifying than she had imagined, and she was only just scratching the surface. The morning dawned with an unnatural chill, a crispness in the air that Eleanor knew wasn't just the lingering touch of autumn. It was the day the HOA had threatened to act, and the low rumble of heavy machinery approaching her property confirmed her worst fears. She stood on her porch, a solitary figure against the imposing silhouette of the Old Vance Observatory, as a flatbed truck carrying a section of temporary chain-link fencing pulled up, followed by Mr. Sterling's gleaming black SUV. A crew of burly men in hard hats and safety vests began unloading tools, their faces grim and uncommunicative. Mr. Sterling emerged from his vehicle, a triumphant, almost predatory glint in his eyes. "Good morning, Miss Vance," he called out, his voice unnervingly cheerful. "As per our final notice, we are proceeding with the removal of the non-compliant structure. We've brought a temporary replacement to ensure your property remains secured." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "You have no right," she declared, her voice shaking slightly despite her resolve. "This fence is integral. You don't understand what you're doing." Sterling merely waved a dismissive hand. "We understand bylaws, Ms. Vance, and the safety of this community. Proceed, gentlemen." The men, clearly uncomfortable but professional, began to work, the air filled with the metallic shriek of angle grinders, the clang of tools, and the low thrum of a hydraulic cutter. Eleanor watched in horrified fascination as they targeted a section of the fence near the observatory's rear, a particularly ancient and gnarled segment that Arthur Vance's journals had described as a primary anchor point. Each spark that flew from the grinding wheel felt like a blow to her own chest. She pleaded, she argued, she even threatened legal action, but her words were lost in the cacophony. The workers, under Sterling's unwavering gaze, pressed on. Then, with a final, agonizing groan of tortured metal, a 10-foot section of the unique, dark fence was severed from its moorings. It toppled inward with a deafening crash, kicking up a cloud of ancient dust and debris. The moment the section hit the ground, everything changed. The air, already cold, plummeted several degrees, and a sudden, profound silence descended, muffling the sounds of the machinery, the distant chirping of birds, even the thud of Eleanor's own frantic heartbeat. It was as if the very atmosphere had been sucked dry of sound. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer began to emanate from the newly exposed ground where the fence had stood. It wasn't light, but an absence of it, a localized distortion that seemed to absorb the ambient sunlight, making the area appear darker, deeper, like a void in reality. Then came the sound, a low, resonant hum, far deeper and more unsettling than the one she'd heard in her study. It wasn't a hum in the air. It was a hum within her, vibrating in her teeth, her bones, the very marrow of her being. It brought with it a profound sense of disorientation, a dizzying nausea that made her stumble. The workers, who had been moving to secure the fallen section, froze. Their faces, visible through the sudden, eerie gloom, were etched with confusion and dawning fear. One man dropped his wrench with a clatter that seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. Eleanor, despite the sickening disorientation, recognized it instantly from Arthur's frantic notes. The resonance, the pull. It seeks to equalize. This was the phenomenon, the unstable frequency that the fence was designed to dampen. The void-like shimmer intensified, expanding slowly from the breach, and Eleanor could feel a subtle, almost imperceptible drag on her senses, a feeling of being pulled towards the darkness. It wasn't a physical pull, but something more insidious, a subtle draining of energy, of light, of presence. Panic flared, but her mind, honed by days of frantic research, immediately sought a solution. Arthur had mentioned harmonic counter-frequencies. She remembered a small, lead-lined box in the observatory's main chamber, a device he'd called a temporal regulator. It was a long shot, but it was all she had. "Get back!" she screamed, her voice sounding thin and reedy in the strange, muffled air. "Everyone, move away from the breach." Mr. Sterling, initially stunned, quickly recovered, his face contorted in a mask of anger and denial. "What is this, Miss Vance? Some kind of theatrical display?" "A smoke machine. This is highly irregular." He gestured furiously at the trembling workers. "Get that temporary fence up. Now." But the men were hesitant, their eyes wide with fear, staring at the shimmering void that seemed to pulse with an unseen, unheard energy. One worker, a burly man named Dave, pointed a shaking finger at the observatory. Mr. Sterling, the air around it, it's wrong. As if on cue, the copper dome of the observatory, usually dull and weathered, began to glow with a faint, internal luminescence, a soft, pulsating blue light that seemed to respond to the hum. The light was beautiful, ethereal, yet deeply unsettling, a beacon of something ancient and powerful. The hum intensified further, now accompanied by a low, almost guttural thrum that vibrated the very ground beneath their feet. A fine dust began to sift down from the eaves of the observatory, not ordinary dust, but something dark and crystalline, glittering faintly as it caught the strange blue glow. Eleanor ignored Sterling, her eyes fixed on the glowing dome. This was it, the manifestation. She sprinted towards the observatory's heavy, reinforced door, fumbling with the ancient lock. "It's not a trick, Mr. Sterling," she yelled over her shoulder, her voice strained. "It's what the fence was containing. You've opened a door." Inside the observatory, the air was even colder, thick with the same disorienting hum. She found the lead-line box, a complex array of dials and crystals, just as Arthur had described. With trembling fingers, she activated it, recalling the sequence from his journals. A high-pitched whine erupted from the device, a counter-frequency designed to disrupt the phenomenon. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the deep hum outside began to recede. The shimmering void lessened, the blue glow on the dome faded, and the oppressive silence gave way to the returning sounds of the neighborhood. The street lights, which had dimmed, flickered back to full brightness. The air warmed slightly, though a lingering chill remained. The immediate danger passed, but the breach was still there, a gaping wound in the fence, a stark reminder of what lay beneath. Mr. Sterling stood frozen, his face pale, his usual composure shattered, staring at the now normal-looking observatory, as if it were a ghost. The workers looked at Eleanor with a mixture of awe and terror. The fence was down, the phenomenon had shown itself. And Eleanor knew, with a terrifying certainty, that this was only the beginning. The stakes had been dramatically raised, and the true extent of the danger was now horrifyingly clear. The incident at the fence had been quickly dismissed by Mr. Sterling as a freaky electrical anomaly and Eleanor's overactive imagination, but the tremor of fear in the workers' eyes, and the lingering chill in the air around the observatory, told a different story. Eleanor knew she couldn't rely on the HOA's good sense. She had to force their hand to expose the truth. Armed with her great-grandfather Arthur Vance's most damning journals, schematics, and even a few grainy, unsettling photographs, she demanded an emergency HOA board meeting. By passing Sterling through a rarely used clause in the bylaws, the meeting was held in a smaller, more intimate conference room, the usual community hall deemed a public for what Sterling clearly hoped would be a quick, contained dismissal of Eleanor's delusions. The board members, a mix of skeptical retirees and busy professionals, sat around a polished mahogany table, their expressions ranging from bored impatience to grudging curiosity. Mr. Sterling, however, radiated an icy calm, his eyes fixed on Eleanor with an almost unnerving intensity. "Miss Vance," he began, his voice smooth as silk, "we are here to discuss your continued noncompliance and the unfortunate incident at your property. We reiterate our demand for the fence's complete removal." Eleanor placed a thick, leather-bound journal onto the table with a resonant thud. "No," she stated, her voice clear and unwavering, "we are here to discuss what that fence protects, and why some of you are so desperate to see it gone." She opened the journal to a page filled with Arthur Vance's frantic scrawl, detailing the localized energy fluctuations and temporal distortions he had observed. She showed them a schematic, faded with age, depicting the observatory's internal mechanisms, not as a telescope, but as a complex array of dampeners and stabilizers, all intricately connected to the unique metal of the fence. "This," she explained, pointing to a diagram, "is not just a fence. It's a harmonic resonator, designed to contain a unique, naturally occurring temporal anomaly beneath the observatory. an anomaly my great-grandfather discovered, and which, if unchecked, could destabilize the very fabric of our local reality. A few board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Sterling, however, merely offered a condescending chuckle. Temporal anomalies? Miss Vance, are you suggesting we have a wormhole in our backyard? This is preposterous. Just as Sterling was about to dismiss her, the door to the conference room creaked open, and Mrs. Gable, the seemingly innocuous neighbor from the previous meeting, stepped inside, her face pale but determined. Behind her stood a tall, distinguished man Eleanor didn't recognize, his eyes sharp and intelligent. It's not preposterous, Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Gable said, her voice surprisingly firm, and Miss Vance isn't alone in her understanding. She turned to Eleanor. Eleanor, this is Dr. Arise Thorne. He's a retired theoretical physicist and a former colleague of Arthur Vance's. He's been following your situation. Dr. Thorne stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the journal. Arthur and I corresponded briefly in the late 40s. He spoke of his Chronos project and a localized temporal flux. I dismissed it then as the ramblings of an aging genius. But after what Mrs. Gable described, and the energy spikes reported by the local power grid yesterday, I had to investigate. He pulled out a small, handheld device, a sleek, modern piece of equipment that hummed faintly. As he swept it across the room, it emitted a series of rapid beeps, growing more insistent as he pointed it towards the observatory, visible through the large window. There's a residual energy signature, highly unusual. Consistent with a localized temporal distortion field, the board members gasped, their skepticism visibly wavering. Sterling's composure, however, remained unnervingly intact. This is a coordinated attack, Miss Vance, Sterling declared, his voice suddenly devoid of its usual smooth charm, replaced by a cold, hard edge. A desperate attempt to avoid compliance. He stood, walking to the window, his back to them. You see, the truth is far simpler. This community, the land it sits on, is highly valuable. And the Old Vance property, with its historic landmark status and its unsightly fence, is holding up a major development deal. He turned, a predatory smile now fully unveiled. A deal that would bring significant profit to certain investors. And to the HOA, of course. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. You mean you're trying to remove the fence, not for aesthetics, but to clear the way for a construction project that would destroy the observatory and unleash whatever it contains. Sterling's smile widened, devoid of warmth. Precisely. The anomaly is a convenient fiction. The fence is merely an obstacle, and once it's gone, this prime real estate will be unlocked. He gestured to two burly men who had quietly entered the room behind them, clearly not part of the HOA board. They were dressed in dark suits, their expressions menacing. We have a court order, Miss Vance. Expedited. The fence comes down tonight. Permanently? Dr. Thorne stepped forward, his device beeping frantically. Mr. Sterling, you don't understand the magnitude of what you're doing. This isn't just a temporal flux. Arthur's later notes, which I've only recently accessed, suggest it's a gateway, a fluctuating portal to somewhere else. The fence isn't just a dampener. It's a containment seal. Its removal wouldn't just destabilize the area. It would open a rift. Sterling merely laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Nonsense. There's nothing on the other side but profit. But as he spoke, the lights in the conference room flickered, and a faint, high-pitched whine began to emanate from Dr. Thorne's device, growing louder, more piercing. Outside, the sky over the observatory began to twist, not with clouds, but with subtle, shimmering distortions, like heat rising from an invisible fire. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. Eleanor's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a threat to her property, it was a threat to reality itself. Sterling's men moved to grab Eleanor and Dr. Thorne, but Mrs. Gable, surprisingly agile, blocked their path. You won't get away with this, she cried. The true conspiracy was laid bare. The HOA, or at least its leadership, was not just misguided, but actively complicit in a reckless plan to exploit a dangerous anomaly for financial gain. Eleanor, Dr. Thorne, and Mrs. Gable now stood together, a small, desperate alliance against a powerful, ruthless enemy, facing a clear, immediate threat. The fate of the Old Vance Observatory, and perhaps their very reality, hinged on their next move. The final showdown was upon them. The conference room plunged into chaos. The two burly men, Sterling's enforcers, lunged forward, but Dr. Thorne, despite his age, moved with surprising speed, shoving Mrs. Gable and Eleanor behind him. "Go," he yelled, his voice strained, his device screaming a high-pitched alarm. "Get to the observatory. I'll buy you time." Mrs. Gable, surprisingly, didn't hesitate. She grabbed Eleanor's arm, pulling her towards the door. "He's right. We need to get that temporal regulator online, fully." As they burst out of the HOA building and into the rapidly darkening twilight, the sky above the Old Vance Observatory was a maelstrom of shimmering, unnatural light. The air thrummed with the same disorienting hum Eleanor had felt before, but now it was amplified, a roaring crescendo that vibrated through the very ground. Trees swayed violently, not from wind, but from an unseen force. Distant car alarms began to wail, their electronics shorting out under the strain of the localized temporal distortion. The HOA's heavy machinery, still parked near the breached fence, sparked and sputtered, its engine dying. "They're already there," Eleanor gasped, pointing. Several more figures, dark silhouettes against the swirling light, were gathered at the gaping hole in the fence, some carrying tools, others seemingly observing the escalating phenomenon with a chilling detachment. Mr. Sterling, having shaken off his momentary shock, emerged from the building, shouting orders into a walkie-talkie. "Accelerate! Get that entire fence down, now!" His voice was distorted by the growing hum, but his intent was clear. He was doubling down, determined to remove the last vestiges of the barrier. Eleanor and Mrs. Gable sprinted across the manicured lawns, the ground feeling strangely elastic beneath their feet. The closer they got to the observatory, the more intense the phenomenon became. The air itself seemed to ripple, and brief, ghostly images flickered at the edges of their vision. A glimpse of a primeval forest, a flash of a futuristic cityscape, a fleeting vision of something vast and unknowable. Arthur Vance's journals had warned of this, the bleed through when the barrier weakened. This wasn't just a temporal anomaly, it was a gateway, and it was opening. They reached the observatory door, Eleanor fumbling with the keys, her hands shaking. Inside, the blue light from the dome pulsed violently, casting eerie shadows. The temporal regulator, the lead line box, was still active, but its single counter frequency was clearly insufficient against the escalating forces. Arthur's notes, the full sequence, Eleanor muttered, pulling out a crumpled page from her pocket. "He designed a multi-frequency dampening field, but it requires manual calibration from the main console." As she spoke, a figure detached itself from the group at the fence, a burly man with a crowbar. He was heading straight for the observatory door, clearly intending to stop them. Mrs. Gable, surprisingly, stepped forward. "Go, Eleanor, I'll try to slow him down." Before Eleanor could protest, Mrs. Gable grabbed a heavy, antique telescope stand, positioning herself defiantly in the doorway. "You're not getting in here," she yelled, her voice thin but resolute. The man hesitated, clearly not expecting resistance from an elderly woman. It was a moment of pure, unexpected heroism, buying Eleanor precious seconds. Eleanor burst into the main chamber, the hum deafening, the air thick with the scent of ozone. The central console, a complex array of glowing crystals and intricate dials, beckoned. Her great-grandfather's final, frantic notes flashed in her mind. The key is resonance. Find the harmonic in verse. The portal seeks equilibrium. Deny it. With trembling fingers, guided by instinct and the faded diagrams, Eleanor began to adjust the dials, each turn a battle against the disorienting hum and the terrifying visions that flickered at the edges of her perception. She heard a crash. From the doorway, Mrs. Gable was fighting, bravely but futilely. The man was getting through. Faster. Eleanor. As she calibrated the final dial, a blinding flash of blue energy erupted from the console, followed by a high-pitched, resonant tone that cut through the oppressive hum like a knife. The blue light from the dome intensified, then pulsed outwards, a wave of pure, stabilizing energy. Outside, the swirling distortions in the sky above the observatory shuddered, then began to recede. The hum lessened, replaced by the familiar sounds of the night. The car alarms died down, the air cleared. The temporal gateway, which had been on the verge of fully opening, snapped shut with an almost audible thud. Eleanor stumbled back from the console, exhausted, as the silence returned, a blessed, profound quiet. The man who had been attacking Mrs. Gable stood frozen in the doorway, his crowbar clattering to the ground as the strange energy dissipated. Outside, Mr. Sterling and his cohorts were staring at the now calm observatory, their faces etched with a mixture of terror and disbelief. The fence, though still breached in one section, was holding, the remaining ancient metal glowing faintly with a residual blue light, a testament to its renewed power. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The police, alerted by the widespread electronic disturbances and frantic calls from other residents who had witnessed the strange sky, arrived quickly. Dr. Thorne, bruised but triumphant, emerged from the HOA building, providing expert testimony about the temporal anomaly and the reckless endangerment caused by Sterling's actions. The board members, now fully aware of the terrifying truth, quickly distanced themselves from Sterling. The development deal was exposed as a fraudulent scheme, and Mr. Sterling, along with his shadowy investors, was arrested for reckless endangerment, conspiracy, and property damage. The Old Vance Observatory, once an eyesore, was now recognized as a genuine historic landmark, not just for its architectural significance, but for its vital role in containing a phenomenon that could have had catastrophic consequences. The breached section of the fence was meticulously repaired, reinforced with materials designed by Dr. Thorne based on Arthur Vance's advanced theories. Eleanor, no longer a lone eccentric, became the reluctant guardian of the observatory, working with Dr. Thorne to monitor the temporal anomaly and ensure the fence's integrity. The community, initially skeptical, slowly came to understand the true nature of the Vance anomaly, and a new respect, tinged with a healthy dose of awe, settled over the neighborhood. The immediate danger was averted, the fence secured, and the truth revealed, but the Old Vance Observatory remained, a silent sentinel on the hill, its secrets now understood, its purpose clear. The temporal gateway was contained, but the universe was vast, and the responsibility of protecting humanity from the unseen forces that lay beyond remained. Eleanor knew her fight wasn't truly over, it had only just begun.